How many people understand how mining works? Wow. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is mining. This is the MIT Bitcoin Expo, not the MIT Blockchain Expo, which is really interesting because I go to conferences all the time, and lately I'm going to conferences that are blockchain conferences, not Bitcoin conferences. And here's the reason why. That was my reaction when I first came across Bitcoin, pretty much, until I read the white paper. But the media continued with this story. Bitcoin, it's just silliness, this isn't going to work. It's obviously not going to work. It not working 1 year, not working 2 years, not working 3 years, not working 4 years. The story becomes less and less tenable, right? You keep announcing that Bitcoin is dead, only to be proven wrong 3 months later and be ridiculed by sites like Bitcoin Obituaries. If you're a journalist, that starts to hurt, so you have to change your song. So we went from Bitcoin is bullshit to, well, listen, the currency is bullshit, but this blockchain technology might be interesting, right? It's in a, less decentralized fashion, put the Federal Reserve in charge of it, gave all the mining to Visa. Maybe we'd have something interesting, Give the blockchain technology to Oracle, they'll build something cool with it. And so they're triangulating. And this is a fundamental failure of understanding of what the blockchain is. Because the blockchain without Bitcoin doesn't work. Bitcoin without the blockchain doesn't work, but the blockchain doesn't work without Bitcoin. The blockchain and the technology behind Bitcoin is based on a very careful balance of game theory that creates conditions whereby participants in the network compete to solve a mathematical problem and get reward for it. In competing, and through this arms race, they've escalated this competition to a point of using massive rows of hardware in giant warehouses that consume megawatts of electricity, meaning that they're spending real money, as the journalists call it, to pay the electricity bills in order to make Bitcoin, right? And this isn't some kind of side effect. This is not an appendage to the system. This is not some kind of weird fascination or get-rich-quick scheme. This is the entire basis of the security mechanism. You need a competition. The competition needs to pit the possibility of having honest players working against dishonest players, with a majority being honest. You enforce that by forcing the rules of consensus, and you do that only if you give reward. Now, what happens if that reward is not valuable? Nobody needs to do it anymore, right? Why would anyone spend real electricity to do it? What happens if the cost of mining is not expensive? What if you didn't need electricity? What if you could make mining more efficient so you're not wasting money securing the network? Well, then the cost of attacking the network drops. So you can now attack the network without expending any money. And therefore, there's no incentive to work honestly. The whole point of this is a careful balance. And the balance is this. I'm going to go out and I'm going to invest in a load of hardware. I'm going to hook that hardware up to a megawatt incoming power source. And I'm going to spend 90% of my profits on paying for that electricity bill. Meaning that if I mess up and I don't follow the rules of consensus and I don't play honestly as defined by the rules of consensus, I will not get reward. And I will still have to pay that electricity bill, and suddenly this is going to cost me a lot of money, which makes it very, very dangerous to play against the rules of consensus. You might win in the short term, but in the long term, what you're doing is you're burning a very good investment. If you put all of the money into hashing in order to attack the Bitcoin network, once you've built it all and you turn it on, you then suddenly realize, hey, I could attack the Bitcoin network, or I could make myself some Bitcoin. and earn that reward. And the game theory makes sure that every time you make that thought, you come out on the side of playing the game by the rules of consensus, because it's more profitable to make Bitcoin than it is to attack the network if you have the hashing power. You can't make cheap mining. Cheap mining means that there is no risk. And without risk, why do you have reward? You can't make mining that doesn't reward, because without reward, why would you take the risk? And you can't have a blockchain without this careful balance between risk and reward. There is no blockchain without a valuable currency unit. Here's the thing though. Right now, Bitcoin is a featherweight currency. In international terms, at a global valuation of just over $3 billion, Bitcoin is a toddler, right? There are many corporations that have more money. There are lots of countries that have more money. And so by comparison, Bitcoin doesn't really compete as a national currency. However, Bitcoin is currently running a global level security infrastructure, which means that Bitcoin is resistant to international class computing attacks against it. We have bought a world-class security infrastructure to run a featherweight class currency. Does that look inefficient? Yeah, at this point it really does. Because we're securing against attacks by nation states, by conglomerates of nation states, and by multinationals, and Bitcoin can currently resist those attacks effectively. Bitcoin is not alive because no one's trying to kill it. Bitcoin is alive despite the fact that it is being relentlessly attacked every day, every minute of every hour. And it's alive because the arms race created by the incentive structure of mining has escalated to a point of delivering world-class, international class security for what is still a featherweight currency. And if you look at it at this point, you say, well, it's kind of expensive. It's a pretty expensive security infrastructure to be running for a $2 billion currency. That assumes that the currency won't grow. And that's another fundamental misunderstanding, which is that mining has to scale as the adoption of the currency scales. It doesn't. We already have world-class security from the mining. We don't need a single petahash more mining than we have now to scale Bitcoin to $100 billion, to scale Bitcoin to $1 trillion. We could run a $1 trillion Bitcoin network on the amount of security that we have with some 400 petahashes of mining that we have right now. I don't remember the exact number. So what we've done is we've bought ourselves a really, really big vault, and it was expensive. And we opened that giant warehouse-sized vault, and we parked a tricycle in it, a kid's tricycle. And, you know, one day that vault can hold 100 Ferraris, and right now it's holding a tricycle, and it looks kind of silly, but that's okay, because we can grow into it. And this is a really important thing that people don't understand, because when we grow into it, then Bitcoin is not inefficient. If the world-class security mechanism is supporting a world-scale currency, or even a national-scale currency, in the order of 100 billion, or 200 billion, or perhaps $500 billion, suddenly Bitcoin is the most efficient payment network and low-cost currency that has ever been built by man. Suddenly, it is the most eco-friendly currency on the planet. Its carbon footprint on a per-transaction basis, vis-a-vis the economic activity that it enables, is minuscule. Right now, it's not. But the beauty about this is that Bitcoin is two completely independent economic systems with only one link, which is price. Bitcoin is an economic system in elastic fashion. So, for those who don't understand how mining works, I'm going to give you a quick analogy just to explain some of the key concepts in mining, specifically the concept of difficulty. and adaptive difficulty algorithms. Now, when we say that people are in this competition to solve a problem, and this problem gets more difficult or less difficult, for most people this is hard to understand. In fact, if you're trying to introduce Bitcoin to someone, the first thing you must not say is, this is a math-based currency. Because most people will go, oh, math, oh crap, I suck at math. What, do I have to solve differential equations to pay for coffee? This is terrible. Who designed this? This is ridiculous. It was probably someone at MIT. And I suck at math too, so that would be my reaction. But an easier analogy, and I looked for a long time to try to find an analogy that people could understand. So how many people here are familiar with Sudoku? Oh, good. So that's even more people than mining. We're on a good start here. All right, so Sudoku. Sudoku is interesting because, first of all, it has some very strong analogies to Bitcoin mining. First of all, it's an asymmetric algorithm. That means it's a lot easier to verify than it is to solve. Let me give you an example. I show you a completed Sudoku. At a glance, or with just a few seconds, you can say, oh, yeah, this is correct. This has been solved correctly. You can run a quick check across the rows and say this is correct. Now I give you one that's partially full, not so easy. Now you have to figure out which numbers go where. It's a lot harder to do. Guess what happens when I start scaling that problem up? Now I take that 10-row, 10-column Sudoku and I turn it into a 100-row, 100-column Sudoku. I show it to you when it's full and completed. It'll still take you only about 5 seconds to confirm. You'll just scan the rows and go, yep, all right, that looks good. So the effort you put in verification hasn't dramatically changed. It's gone up linearly. Try solving it. The difficulty in solving that Sudoku has actually increased at an exponential rate. It's gotten a lot harder to solve when you have 100 rows and 100 columns. Now it's going to take you some time. So we fill this room with Sudoku solvers. And I give $100 to the first person who solves a Sudoku. And just before we start, I put a list of numbers on the screen and I say, you fill these in these parts of your Sudoku puzzle that's empty, start your engine. First person to find the solution gets $100. And as soon as you find one, you just go, oh, Sudoku, I got one. And I give you $100. Takes you about 10 minutes. People think, oh, this is a pretty good deal. Let me call my friends down at the MIT dorms and bring them in, and we're going to make a Sudoku cooperative, a pool, let's call it, and it takes you 8 minutes. You keep doing that. After 10 puzzles solved at 8 minutes, I say, okay, hang on a second. This is going too fast. I'm going to increase the rows and columns by 20%, and now I'm going to make it harder for you. So because you bust in a bunch of people and made it easier, I'm going to make the puzzle harder. Let's all agree that if it takes 8 minutes instead of 10, we add 20% more columns. And we keep doing that. And what we can create is an environment where no matter how many people in this auditorium are solving Sudoku, it always takes 10 minutes. If it takes a bit longer, we make it easier. If it takes a bit less time, we make it harder. And that's Bitcoin mining. That really is, in its essence, Bitcoin mining. Now, the numbers you put into the empty Sudoku are the transactions of other people. And when you show one that's solved, everyone can verify it, because they can see the transactions of other people, and those are real, and you filled in the rest of the numbers, which tells me you did some work. You had to do some work. There's no way you just came up with those numbers. It's hard to do, right? If you have to fill in 100-row Sudoku, I know it's going to take you some time. So what you did is you just proved that you did work. The Sudoku itself, a solved Sudoku, upon presentation, implies proof of work. It shows that you have done the work, as long as the initial input is something that I choose, or something random. And that's proof of work. So mining is exactly this. And it started off with Satoshi and one or two other people doing it on their laptops. And today, it's rows upon rows of machines in China on subsidized coal power plants and geothermal in Iceland and God knows where else. Now, the beauty of this is that how difficult it is to solve Bitcoin or how many miners there are in the space has nothing to do with how many transactions are being consumed or produced. It has nothing to do with how much money is on the Bitcoin network. All it has to do is whether it's profitable or not to continue mining. And I can tell you whether it's profitable or not. People sometimes say, you'll read this in media reports, they'll say, well, mining is not going to be profitable when X happens. Well, I can tell you mining will always be profitable. And the reason I know this is because this simple feedback loop results in what in economics is known as a perfect market. The difficulty calibration fixes the supply according to the demand on a 2-week schedule. And when supply consistently meets demand and they move in lockstep, economics teaches us that participation in that market will deliver only marginal profits over a long period of time for the most efficient operators. It will drive you to highest efficiency in a brutally competitive market. So Satoshi didn't just invent a new currency. Satoshi gave us the world's first perfect market, which is quite stunning as an achievement. There is no other market that has a tight feedback loop based on 2016 events, blocks, every 2 weeks, calibrating supply and adjusting price automatically across a global network that is completely decentralized, that is now supporting an industrial economy running at the rate of 3,600 Bitcoin a day. This is absolutely stunning. And this simple, perfect market grew from nothing to a world-class security mechanism in just 5 years. So next time somebody tells you, yeah, I like the blockchain technology, but that Bitcoin currency is kind of silly. Or, I like blockchain technology, but could we do it without mining? Or, I like mining, but could we make it more efficient and not use up so much electricity? Or, I like mining, but could we do it without reward? Understand that they don't understand the basic economic principles of the mining market. Without risk, there is no reward. Without reward, there is no risk. And without the careful balance between risk and reward, there is no security for the blockchain. And therefore, the blockchain doesn't work, and its currency is valueless. People who tell you that they want the blockchain without Bitcoin are people who would say, we like the light bulb, but can you do it without this electricity thing? Because it seems like a big hassle to go deploy all this stuff. Can't we just do it with kerosene? And really what they're thinking of is a kerosene lamp. And we've already done that. I really like this automobile invention, but we don't have any gas station, and it sounds like a real hassle to dig that stuff out of the ground and distribute it in massive international networks. Can we do the automobile, only run it on either steam or with some kind of horse that eats hay? Because we have plenty of that. It's like, yes, but what you're thinking of is the steam locomotive and the horse carriage, and we already have those. You can't do electricity, light bulbs without electricity. You can't do automobiles without gasoline. And you can't do the blockchain without Bitcoin. Thank you. So I'll take, I've got maybe 10 minutes, 9 minutes to take some questions. Please ask the question once you have a microphone, because this is being live cast and we want the audience to be able to hear it. Thank you.
Andreas, how are you? Thanks for the talk. It's always great to hear you, you speak. What is the transition best case scenario away from fractional reserve banking if and when Bitcoin hits critical mass?
What is the transition away from fractional reserve banking if and when Bitcoin achieves critical mass?
Best case.
Best case scenario. I think people underestimate the other side, meaning that we're not just trying to make Bitcoin succeed. That's part of the equation. But Bitcoin doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a context of 194 other currencies, including the US dollar as a world reserve currency. And here's the thing you don't see on the news, or if you do, you see it very rarely. Our generation is currently experiencing a historic event, an event that has not happened in the last 3 centuries, a currency war and race to the bottom of absolutely unprecedented scale. Never before in the history of currencies have 21 central banks fixed their interest rates at 0 and kept them there for almost 6 years. This has never happened before. Never before in history had a central bank gone to negative interest rates and then be followed by 6 other central banks. Never before in history was deflation occurring simultaneously in the entire world economy. So you've got to understand that sometimes it's not about Bitcoin succeeding. It's simply about Bitcoin surviving while the entire world economic system collapses in ashes around it. We are watching, and this is not flippant or funny. This is what leads to wars. This is what leads to violence and strife and ash and ruins in real life. The last time we had a currency crisis of this scale, and it wasn't this big, was in the 1930s, and we know what happened next. This has never happened before. We are living at a time when every single central bank on Earth has gone nuts, and everyone is pretending as if there's nothing to see here. Unemployment out of control, middle class dying, stock market at all-time highs. How is that possible, right? Bonds tanking, stock market exploding. Currency tanking, stock market exploding. These things are not possible. Rational economics tell us that these things do not work. So the question about what happens with Bitcoin next is really the small question. The big question is, where do we go when the era of central banking dies? Because it's about to die. Okay, next question. Who's got a microphone?
Hi, Andreas. Thank you. You've been just wonderful for the community for so long. Jason Wong, just a retired physician with a business background. Your whole premise of the talk is about greed and honesty. It's interesting. As the ecosystem develops and there's more financial derivative instruments, do you see a possible scenario where a derivative instrument with a 51% attack could be used to destroy the system?
I think 51% attacks are overrated as a practical consideration. The truth is that a 51% attack doesn't actually give the attacker a good outcome. And it takes a lot of resources. And as I said before, I think when you reach the point where you have that amount of resources, the natural and rational calculation will be to invest them in getting more Bitcoin instead of attacking the system. The scenario under which it works is an attacker who is not interested in or motivated by profit, but purely for destructive means. And what that will do is it will force the system itself to evolve. Now, the advantage here is that Bitcoin is a decentralized organism that is dynamically scalable and can be modified. It's software. And it's not easy to modify it because it requires consensus, but if it's under attack, that consensus happens more easily. And I am very confident that software systems can and do adapt dynamically to external threats. The interesting thing is that when they do so, they become stronger over time. And so we've already seen that. Bitcoin has suffered setbacks and attacks again and again and again. And as time goes by, Bitcoin gets stronger, it's harder to attack it, and it learns more and more attacks. It's building immunity.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being here today. I've been following Bitcoin for quite some time, and everything I see and read in presentations you give and what people in this room are doing with Bitcoin is true. It's solving a lot of problems. Software will solve problems. Technology always solves problems. However, we live in a world where, even though that may be true, philosophy is what convinces people of things. And right now, it seems like something like Bitcoin is at the forefront of a giant wall of this convincing when it comes to philosophy. And I'll make the question now. How do we convince those who wish to invest in Bitcoin and Bitcoin-related companies that it has this world-class security, which I agree with you, it does, when all we hear about is hacking attacks to steal Bitcoin? And please don't use the recent incident of $1 billion being stolen by these Russian and Chinese guys, which just happened with real cash, when there's all you'll ever be convinced about is it's no good, it's going to get hacked, and so you can't use Bitcoin. How do we convince people of that? I don't believe that.
Yeah,
we don't. I wouldn't be here. How do we convince people out of that?
We don't convince people to use Bitcoin. I think it's a mistake to convince people to use Bitcoin. I think we work hard on making Bitcoin even more useful and even more applicable for more and more people around the world. And the simple truth is that if I have to convince an American about the usefulness of Bitcoin, it's an uphill struggle. It's like, you're 5% of the population, you've got the only world reserve currency, your bank is not stealing from you, but a far, far worse, and most people live in a world that is very different from this. Bitcoin doesn't require a hard sell, because Bitcoin solves life and death problems for some people around this world. There are 6 billion people who have underbanking facilities, who live in places where they have cash or barter-based societies, whose government is actively stealing from them and is little different from organized crime, where the banks are organized crime, and where the simple process of securing a future for your children is fraught with risk, as you see your entire fortune destroyed in a single generation, not once, not twice, but maybe 3 times, as occurs all across Latin America, parts of Southeast Asia, and recently Southern Europe, where I come from, in Greece. In these places, and in the places where the only form of technology available is a Nokia 1000 feature phone, where the nearest bank is 100 miles upstream by canoe, and where banking services will never reach, we have the opportunity to bring 6 billion people into a global economy that they have been excluded from because of politics, cost, and inefficiency, without deploying massive amounts of infrastructure, by engineering a technological leapfrog event, just like cell phones leapfrogged landlines in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia. Now every single one of those cell phones can become a Bloomberg terminal, a stock exchange terminal, a Western Union remittance terminal, a mortgage origination terminal, a lending terminal for microloans. That means that every phone becomes a banking service. And if you bring that to the world, they don't need convincing. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounded like you were claiming that the current mining security was enough to sustain a much larger economy. But if the economy of Bitcoin grows, won't more miners scale up their operations to spend more to claim the reward?
Well, if the economy grows, it depends on whether, really the only dependence is whether the Bitcoin price encourages even more speculation. But you've got to realize that what we're looking at in terms of mining industry from, say, 2014 out, and what we looked at from 2008 to 2014, is that in the first period, we're looking at order of magnitude improvements going from CPU mining to GPU mining to FPGAs to ASICs. You're looking at 100x plus improvements, generation on generations of chips. That evolution has now run smack into Moore's law and is at the cutting edge of Moore's law at 28 nanometers or below. there is no 100x improvement now. In fact, Bitcoin mining is now driving chip fabrication faster than desktop CPUs, which is incredible to even think about. And it may be the first technology that goes sub 14 nanometers, even before GPUs. Now, what that means is that we will not see 100x improvements. You cannot outpace the competition by getting the next generation of chips faster than everybody else because it hasn't been invented. So now mining, in order to continue to be profitable, has to be hyper efficient in terms of operating costs, cost of electricity, thermal efficiency, electrical efficiency, and that's where the game is. Where we're going to see mining go is not in massive increases in hash power, but in more efficient uses of electricity for the existing levels of hash power. There is no 100x increase possible in the next generation. I predict we're going to see mining technology surpass the current state-of-the-art in data centers and start approaching the state-of-the-art of nuclear reactors. Meaning that if you want to generate that type of thermal load, you're not looking at a 10 kilowatt air-cooled rack in a data center. You're looking at a 100 kilowatt submerged in mineral oil in a cooling bath, which is really nuclear reactor technology. And that's where you see the next generation of efficiency. It's really mind-boggling, but that's where we're going. So the mining industry cannot scale 100x because of physics. But the economy will scale a lot more than that. Thank you. Do I have one more question? Out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.